Do you see this?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, started in the end. Perfect. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and to share these results from our bird monitoring. I'm part of the Umeå River Delta field station. I'm responsible for bird ringing and for overall bird monitoring. Can you hear me? Is it the sound okay?
The sound is very good.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So my disposition of this talk is going to be, first I'm going to go through who, why, and how we did it. Then I'm going to give you some background of the area that we've monitored, because it's been monitored for 20 years ago as well. So we know the history of the population and the population declines and increases of different species. And then I'm going to go down into detail a little bit with the 3 study sites in the outer archipelago and look at the effects of potential effects of mink control. So as I told you, this was carried out by Umeå River Delta field station. It's a field station that is positioned right outside of Umeå in the Delta area. We're mainly focused on bird banding and coastal bird monitoring. So we're helping the Västerbotten County Board with the coastal bird monitoring as well. And these are the guys that did the job. So thanks to them. The aim of the monitoring was to estimate the number of breeding pairs within each site, and then to estimate or to actually get numbers of the yearly breeding output. And this is a different strategy from the county board that only estimates number of breeding pairs and do not follow up and monitor yearly breeding output, which is fairly important in my opinion. And then another aim, of course, was to contrast the results from these monitoring events between the mink-controlled and reference sites that we use. Here in the study area, you see Holmsund there in the upper center here. And then you have Umeå along the Umeå River here. We have the inner archipelago area where there were mink control. We had the outer archipelago area where there were mink control, and then we had the reference site down here to the lower right in the picture. And as you can see, we had 3 sub-sites in each larger site. So in all, we had 9 sites that we monitored twice yearly. Now for this talk, I'm going to focus especially on the outer archipelago because it's most interesting, and I'll come back to why later. But I also want to give you a background on what we know about the outer archipelago, and I'll come back to that in a short time. So how did we do this monitoring then? Well, we used the same methods as used for the Swedish coastal bird monitoring program. So the same we use for when we monitor birds for the county board. This means that we visit, we go out very early in the morning and all the islands. Looks like someone forgot to turn off their mic. And then we count the number of breeding birds around the islands.
Freddy. Oh, tack. I think it's all right, Thomas. Thomas, you haven't put your mic on. I think you have to turn it on again.
Alltså, det var jag som gick in och stängde av Freddys mikrofon. Jag undrar om jag stängde av allas mikrofoner då, så att även Thomas vart avstängd.
Ja, du gjorde nog det. Kan du öppna igen då?
Hur ogör jag det då?
Jag vet inte om det är Peter som kan göra det kanske.
Hör ni mig nu?
Nu hör vi dig, Thomas. Bra.
Jag stod på den själv här nu, får vi se om det...
Toppen.
Jag förstår att PA inte vill höra mer, men han får stå ut.
Ledsen Thomas, jag försöker bara hjälpa dig.
Säkert. Jag vet inte riktigt när jag försvann, så jag börjar om här då.
Börja om från början på den här bilden.
Ja. So when we do the monitoring, we use the same methods as used for the Swedish coastal bird monitoring program as like the county boards are using for their surveys, which is that we go out very early in the mornings and we visit all the islands from all angles all around the islands, and also land on the islands if necessary to see all the breeding birds on and around the islands. We're always at least 3 people, 1 boat driver and 2 bird counters. In this case, we do 2 visits. One in early June to estimate number of breeding pairs, and then one in mid-July to see how the breeding output of these pairs are. And like I said, in June we landed on islands where the number of breeding pairs could not be safely estimated, but in July we landed on all islands because finding chicks is tricky from a boat. So that's pretty much how we did it. And now I'm going to give you some background on the area, the east coast of Holmön. There was a bird monitoring done in 2003, between 2000 and 2003, a yearly monitoring. So now I'm giving you an average of the number of breeding pairs here of different species. 2003, between 2000 and 2003, contrasting with the green bar, that is 2018. And for black guillemot, you can see that the decline is very pronounced. It's gone down from about 2,100 pairs to very few pairs, over 1% increase in population size in these 15 years, which is very, very disturbing. Looking at the larger gulls, we see the same or a similar population trend where herring gull and lesser blackback gull has declined more over 40%, and greater blackback gull over 20% on the east coast of Holmön. This is a different story. Terns, Arctic common terns, seems to have increased. We have a 25% increase of that period, whereas Caspian terns have decreased with 50%. And this increase is hard to explain, but it could be because Arctic and common terns often can compensate by mink predation by swapping island and start initiating a new clutch, a new breeding attempt, and they can do several breeding attempts in one summer, and maybe this is one reason why they have increased when the others has decreased. Shorebirds see a very, very sad trend as well. Ruddy turnstone over 60% decrease, red shank 55%. So you see all of these breeding birds have decreased. Diving ducks, you see 60% decrease for velvet scooter, 77% of tufted ducks. So it's really an overwhelming negative trend from 2000 to 2018 here on the East Coast. And why is that? What's going on? That's the big question. And here's where we're thinking that mink might be an important factor in this. If you look at the sites specifically that we chose to monitor for this, for FAMNA, for the mink control, you can see that for the 18 species that were monitored in 2000 to 2003, in the site 1, which is the northernmost site, 3 species have decreased significantly, 12 is stable, and 3 is actually increasing. And the three species that are increasing in site 1 is common gull, Arctic terns, and the black-headed gull. So there are, up in the northernmost site, both negative and positive trends, if you look at it in more detail. But if we go down further south in site 2 and 3, in site 2 you see 13 species declining significantly, 5 that are stable, and 0 that are increasing. So a much harder or clearer decline in breeding pairs in site 2, and the same goes for site 3, the southernmost part along Holmön, where we see 11 species decreasing, 7 is stable, and no one is increasing. So I'm painting a rather dark picture here for you, where everything is declining basically, and why. We had our suspicion that of course mink would be an important factor, but there might be other factors as well. And then this FAMNA came along and was an excellent opportunity to try and see what part mink plays in this. Due to unfortunate circumstances, we couldn't use the design that we designed to its full extent, because the mink control was fairly low in the inner archipelago, and it didn't show any directional change in breeding pairs or chick production over time because of this. And of course, neither did the reference site, which is Shouldn't, since we had constant mink pressure there. So this is why I focus on the results from the 3 sites in the outer archipelago, because here is where we actually had some mink control related effects. So for site 1, you remember the site that was northernmost, and where a few species increased, a few species decreased, but most were stable. Here is our monitoring data from the 3 years to 2018 to 2020. Blue is total of number of pairs in the site, and orange is number of chicks. And as you can see, the total number of pairs are fairly stable between 450 and 500 pairs in total. But if you look at chick production, it's extremely bad in 2018 and 2019. And 2020 is completely different. It goes from about around 10 chicks per year in the site, this site 1, to 412 in 2020, which is an extreme effect. And this around site 1, there was a very successful mink eradication in early spring and early summer, and it's fairly obvious that these are the effects of this mink eradication, because when we go south to site 2, there's fewer breeding pairs in site 2. We have between 140 and 180 breeding pairs, but the chick production is terrible, and in 2020 we had 0 chicks in this area, and it's a square kilometer, so it's a big area. And
this was a reference site, right?
Sorry?
Site 2 was a reference site?
No, I'm on the east coast of Holmön now. So I'm
okay.
So they are all controlled sites, but they are sub sites of the Holmön site.
All right.
So I'm not talking about the reference site or the inner archipelago site at all, because of the no effect that they showed, because of no low mink control in the inner archipelago. I can say that both the reference site and the inner archipelago site had a much better chick production than the outer archipelago. We have a strong, I think, a strong effect of human presence in both those sites, especially in the inner archipelago, which is superior of both the reference site and the outer archipelago, and the human presence will hinder the minks probably from predating. But we can talk more about that later. As you can see here on site 3, which was the northernmost site on the east coast of Holmön, we also have a terrible chick production in 2020 as well. So it's not weather or conditions or some abiotic factors going on here, because then we would have seen a similar increase in 2020 as we do in site 1. But in site 2 and site 3, we have really terrible chick production as well. So it's clearly an effect of mink control in these sites. And it sort of gives hope as well, because if we can eradicate mink and get this kind of chick production, might actually be able to turn some of these terrible trends that we've seen over the last 15 years. So hopefully we'll be able to continue this somehow after FAMNA ends. So my conclusions is that mink seem to have a profound effect on breeding success of these birds based on this limited data that we were able to collect when it comes to mink control. We don't see any effect of mink on short-term numbers of breeding pairs. So maybe breeding pairs isn't the best way to survey coastal birds, because they are long-lived and you might not see effects until after 15 years, 20 years. But anyway, we don't see any effect on breeding pairs of a mink on short term, but we do see it very clearly on chick production. And long-term effects are visible, as you can see from the 2003 to 2018 data. We see that clear negative trends, but is it all mink? We can't really say. It can be a combination between white-tailed eagles that have colonized the area and increased, cranes that are starting to go out on the islands and predate on chicks as well. Changing climate and the changing Baltic Sea might have to do with it, but all in all, I don't think that the climate and the changing Baltic Sea is causing all of the effect that we see in our outer archipelago, because then we would see effects in the inner archipelago as well, and similarly strong effects. And we don't see that. We see a much milder effects, like I said, probably because of the human presence there. Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
All right, thank you very much for now. We're going to come back to you with questions in a short while. But before that, we will listen to JE Skåtan, who is a senior advisor at State Nature Inspectorate in Norway. Jon Erling.
Hello.
Hello.
When I sit and listen to you, it's very interesting, but it reminds me like European Song Contest from the different land and the results. So I will give the results from the Norwegian jury. Try to give you this. There it is.
Yes.
Good. Yes. Monitoring effects on mink control on breeding birds. I will start with a few sentences about the background. We start our job on this plan against mink. And the plan say we know the negative effects on other species and the ecology. It's also say that no international agreements about foreign species. If we refrain from doing anything with mink, we ignore the law. And finally, they say, and I like that they say that, use your knowledge immediately, what we call adaptive management. So when I come in to this job, we just try to do it. Just try to manage the mink and was lesser focus on what happened with the birds. Some fundamentals to keep in mind. Thomas Brodin talk about something like that, and I can repeat something. As I told you, the focus for us in these 9 years, since we started in 2011, has been how to take care of the mink efficiently. There are more monitoring programs in several places where we have mink projects, but a few of them are connected directly to the management of mink. And if we look at the effects, it's difficult to connect changes in bird population to removal of the mink population without a scientific experiment. We have no scientific experiment in Norway so far. And it's especially difficult in a situation where many seabirds have major problems for other reasons than predation from mink. And also another problem, and that is that the most vulnerable species like common gull, tern and black element has not bred in some of these areas for decades, or they are in low, and it's a low potential immigration from other places because of increases of many population all over. In most of the areas, mink has affected other species in more than 40 years, 50 years, and we have removed mink in 4 to 8 years. Actually, just in the last few years, know how to do it. But I'm gonna tell you something good news. Vegøyene, an example. I will tell you first. That's a UNESCO World Heritage areas, and that's a unique tradition. We make hide for either and harvest the down from nest. In Norwegian, we call the places like that egg dunvær. Those places where people live, and the outcome, one thing they use for outcome is egg and dun. It looks like this. They make a hide for the either. They come up from the sea, breed in the boxes in the small house, and hatch, go back to the sea, and landowner or the people who live here, they take the dun. And mink here is a local disaster. So all mink removes before the season, hatch season, and breeding birds monitoring of locals every day. They look after these birds like their own child. We go, as I show you where it was in this place. We go to my place where I live, south in Norway. We have a lot of protected seabirds island, and protect the landscape around this. We started removing mink in 2011, totally 473 mink. And all areas are free of mink before every nesting season. Later today I told you how we do it. Some of the most relevant species have not nested or have lived in very low numbers for years in these areas. But every bird, I can say every feather, counted in years by enthusiastic ornithologists. And the conclusion from the ornithologists is after 9 years of job that they can monitoring some moderate effects for some species. But it's difficult to register any huge positive effects on nesting birds. We go further north to Svellingsflaket in Norland. We have a project there on 300 islands and archipelago. Started in 2016. In these years, 2020, we are finished it. I think it's over. It's archipelago like this. All these areas are empty now, I think, for mink. Maybe a few. Oh, I lost my picture here. Do something wrong. Oh. There it is. On this,
no, we can't see anything. We can't see your presentation.
Sorry. Okay.
Now we can see it again. Yes.
We're just starting to monitoring there. There are I'm monitoring of breeding birds before 2016, and we have also the 2 last year, some results from there. And the point is that there are still some of the most relevant species there, so they can respond. And the report from 2009, 2011 in words, not in statistics and curves, but it seems to be more of the birds previously affected by mink. But the years to come are going to show us if there are some effects. There we go to the Oslofjord, Færder National Park. Remove all mink from a lot of islands in 2014, 2016. And from this work, we have the first article about mink and positive effects in ornithologic journal, Vår Fuglefauna, this summer. And the title was the development of a population of black gullment after removal of mink in Færder National Park. And this is our first numbers, and as you can see, there are put out some bird box just to find. Black gullment can be hard to black gullment can be hard to monitoring, so they used bird boxes, and as you can see, there are an increase of number of nesting in these boxes after starting to remove the mink. It's a nice place in Norway, Sveinsflaket, and that's what I can tell you about monitoring breeding birds in place where we have a job with mink. Thank you.
Are you done?
Done.
Right, great. Apparently, there different bird species react differently to mink management or mink eradication programs. How do you explain that? That some bird species deliver fast, have a fast response to this, and some other bird species have a much slower response? This question is for both Thomas and Jon Erling.
The different species have different ecology, different egg, different number of cubs, chickens. But it's a lot of factors out there. It's climate, food, and it's a lot of different places from high north to the south. So it's a complicated play, I think.
What do you say, Thomas?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that it might be easier to explain fast decline or differences in decline than maybe differences in increase, but I'm not sure about that. But if mink affects the adults as well as the chicks severely, like in black guillemot, then you would expect a faster decline. But if they mainly affect chicks, then the long-lived older birds will stay, and the decline will be slower, at least to begin with. So that could at least explain some of the variation in how birds respond when they decline.
Like we heard about the kiwi in New Zealand. Long-lived birds.
Maybe you say that, Thomas, but we don't know. There are different reasons why the same species decline in different places.
Absolutely.
So if there are the food, lack of food, it happens nothing when you take away the mink. But if it is the mink, you got that good conclusion. So the problem is that we don't know on each places what the reason is for the population to decline.
No, I completely agree with that as well. I just thought that the question was why they differed in their response to mink. So that's why I answered that. Right.
I can come back to the complex picture later, but Xavier, you have a question or a comment, and would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes. Wondering if you had measures of the number of mink that escape trapping and hunting in the winter and spring, and if you could use that to explain the breeding success of the birds. So this could be from camera trapping or going with dogs after the hunting, or maybe even the number of mink you find in the autumn, which must be the offspring of the mink that escaped trapping or mink that recolonized. And could that explain the difference in response to mink trapping in your different study areas?
That's a good question. I should that I have told you about how we do it later, and maybe you get the answer there.
That's fine. Thank you. I can wait.
Thomas, do you have something to say about this question?
I can't say that I do.
All right. Did anyone? We have a question here from Martin. Did anyone have an instruction for making bird boxes for black guillemot and hides for common aider to share? Oh, that's probably a chat forum question. So you can ask in the chat forum. Or you can answer that question in the chat forum. Peter Nordin, you've raised your hand. What kind of question do you have?
I just had a comment to Xavier's question. We have, of course, no measure of a residual mink. We will get next seasons in our study areas to see what happens. But so far we don't have any.
All right. Before we stop here, could you just, Thomas and Jon-Erling, elaborate a bit on those major ongoing changes, both in the Bothnian Sea and the North Atlantic? I mean, Jon-Erling, you mentioned climate change. There is a lot of fishing going on in the Bothnian Sea. We have problems with B vitamin deficiency and environmental toxins. This is a complex issue. Can you just tell us a bit more about this in your different areas? How does mink control fit into all this?
Maybe I can go first. That's a huge question. I mean, maybe we have another conference to discuss that, but what I think when I have a job with a mink is that I can do nothing with fisheries, I can do nothing with the climate change, but I can do something with mink.
It's a concrete thing you can do practically today.
Yes, and we know that on at least at some place it's effect.
And you, Jon-Erling, when me and you talked a couple of days ago, you talked quite a bit about climate change. What do you see there?
I don't know so much about it, but what I read about is that the temperature in the sea changes, and when the temperature in the sea changes, there are changes with fish and with the things that the birds eat. And we also have a very different fisheries. For example, mackerel, I don't know the English name for it. It was a species that was normally in southern Norway, and now they fish mackerel up to the high north in extremely big numbers. So things happen out there in large scale.
Yeah, I think the similar things are going on in the Baltic Sea as well, where we're overfishing and the eutrophication and all kinds of toxins have changed together changed the environment and the ecosystem into something different from before, and how that combined effects of all these factors are affecting our breeding bird populations. It's impossible to say, but I'm fairly certain that it can't be good. But I have no idea how it compares to the threat of mink. Maybe in the long run it's might be worse for some species, but in the short term, mink might be the easy target.
Yeah. It's probably about accumulated effects, right?
Yeah, and there was a question about ecotoxicology in the chat as well, and we are not sampling birds for any toxins or heavy metals or pharmaceuticals or PFAS or PFOS or anything like that. It would be super interesting since that's what I do at SLU. I mean, ecotox mainly, but we have not started to sample them. We haven't ethical permission to do so either. So at this point, no samples are taken for those purposes.
All right, good. We're gonna have one more question, and that is from Mikko Toivola. Please, Mikko.
Yes, I just want to make one comment about the results from archipelago sea breeding bird counts in the areas where the wing has been removed. There is a number of studies made in Turku University, which I'm pretty sure that most of the scientists know already, but there are very good results about how the breeding birds respond to the mink removal after number of years. There are even results about the increase of frogs. This takes even longer period of time. But there are good results, and now when we are removing wing from another areas, we have those breeding bird counts. Yesterday you saw those areas in Madeleine Newman's presentation, and after a few years we can maybe say more that how the birds in those areas are responding to the removal and raccoon dogs.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas and Jon Erling. We have 1 hour left till lunch, and I think we need a 5-minute leg stretcher before we move on into this this last hour. So please leave the computer, stand up, jump around for 5 minutes, and we start the last presentation or the last 3 presentations 11:15. Okay? See you soon.